Hello and welcome to this episode of the South West Heritage Trust podcast. Today Bob Croft, Head of Historical Environments and Estates, is taking me around Norton Hillfort, so I'm going to grab my Wellington boots and meet you on the Hillfort.
Today we've come to explore one of the landscape sites, these very important landscape sites. How do I know they're important? Well, they're important because they're nationally recognised as scheduled monuments. In this case we've come up past the school at Norton Fitzwarren, little car park at the bottom, walk up through the bushes, and then suddenly we're on the edge of a field and you think, well, it's just a field. But actually there's a lot more to it, and in the next 20 minutes or so we'll go and explore some of those features to see, which include banks, ditches, and some of the hidden remains of what is one of Somerset's really rather special hill forts.
So we head off to the left now, around the Hillfort.
Yes, it's important to go left. You always should walk clockwise, don't walk to the right, because there's superstition, and particularly with this site, with its folklore, myths and legends, if you go the wrong way you might end up seeing the dragon.
It's a little windy and a little rainy, but why have you taken me to this spot exactly?
We're standing on the west side of the Hillfort, where we're looking at, you can see to the south there's a great ridge for people who come and stand on this point. You look to the south, which is on your left, you're seeing the Blackdown Hills. If you look straight ahead you can see the edge towards the Brendan Hills, which is over towards Wiveliscombe, and then to the right there's the Quantock Hills. So you get that whole vision, and in the foreground immediately we have Norton Manor Camp, which is the camp for the Royal Marine Commandos, and we'll probably hear their helicopters while we're here today.
I'm sure we will, Bob. Norton Hillfort, why is it important? Why are we talking about it today?
Well, one of the challenges with this site is actually finding it. Many people will come up to here and they think, well, I can see I'm on a hill, but where's the fort? So the challenge today is for us to go and try and find some of those banks and ditches which are now almost completely hidden in tree cover.
If you were to walk up to the Hillfort, as many people will, what sorts of features are they looking out for?
What you're looking for really are marked banks, and some of these banks are up to 3 metres high. The ditches, particularly at the entrances, are about 6 metres deep, so very, very distinctive features, but most of them covered by trees and bushes, so you can't actually see very much on your first arrival.
Could you tell me about the people who used this Hillfort?
Yeah, well, it dates back from the Bronze Age, shall we say 1100 BC. Also in the Iron Age period, maybe 500 BC, up until the arrival of the Romans in 1st century AD 43. So there's good 500 years of occupation. And here we're at the boundary between two different tribes, really. We've got Devon over on that side, the Dumnonia, and we've got the Jura Treegays the other way, and the Dubunni. So there's 3 tribes that came into Somerset, but this side we're on the boundary between those 2 Iron Age territories.
Is there any archaeological evidence to explain this?
Archaeological remains from excavations that were done in 1908, 1969, 70s, early digs there have added a whole host of information to our record, and much of the information is now stored in the archives at the Somerset Heritage Centre, including a very significant collection of bronze deposits, Bronze Age deposits in the form of bracelets and axe heads.
And when did it stop being used by the original occupants?
Yeah, we don't really know what happened at the end of the use of hill forts. We think this one's been in use maybe for 2,000 years. We've got crop mark evidence of the interior, which is a crop mark is where differential crop growth shows lights and dark lines when viewed from the air, and that shows enclosures, little enclosures of perhaps field systems, house platforms, circular marks making the remains of houses, and they're definitely going through into the Roman period. So we've got Roman pottery from this site, so that brings you right through into the 3rd and 4th century AD. We've got no Saxon or Dark Age occupation that we know of. So by the end of, shall we say, Roman Britain, this area had stopped being lived in and farmed, but they weren't actually using it perhaps as a fort then, just as an area to put a farm in.
You've talked about lots of the hill forts around Somerset. Why were these hill forts built in the first place?
Again, you know, it is that sort of very long and complicated question and answer. People have been looking at hill forts right the way back from the 1930s all the way through. Dinah Dobson did work in Somerset in the 1930s. She referred to them as camps. They were often called camps in the old antiquarian literature because they were seen to be places of defence, they were seen to be places of refuge. People recognised the banks and the ditches very, very clearly as defensive features. But they were also centres for social gatherings, for exchange. They were a central place within a catchment of the surrounding communities. But really what they do represent more than anything else is cooperation. You can't build and construct one of these without everybody being firmly on board, because you're really going to influence the whole of society in and around all the local little Iron Age villages. Everybody has to join in to build something on this scale and then to look after it.
You mentioned the Iron Age peoples. What kind of people were these that were occupying the hill forts through the years? A
bit like you and I think they would be the local people who are living, farming, working the land. Many of the, as soon as we start looking, and much development around the edge of Taunton recently, where they're putting in new estates, or down here where a solar farm has just gone in, we discovered a little Roman farmstead. We discovered some Iron Age ditches. So the whole of this part of the Vale of Taunton was fairly well occupied, shall we say, in those first 500 years BC, and then right the way through into the Roman period. And we've got Roman occupation in the middle of the hill fort itself. We've seen crop marks which show pits, ditches, enclosures, which are characteristic of a little Roman farm. So farms were actually on the top of the hill as well as in the vale and the lower lands around us.
And when was this hill fort first occupied and built?
Now that's well, where we're standing here. One of the interesting things about Norton is that Norton covers two phases of occupation. We'll go and have a wander over in a minute as we walk towards the central and more northern part of the hill, whereas in fact there's a Bronze Age smaller enclosure, perhaps 2 hectares, about a third of the size of the main hill fort, and that's been dated back to the Bronze Age period, maybe 1100 BC, so a good 500-600 years before the main hill fort was constructed.
So you mentioned the pottery and the axes. What sort of life would these Bronze Age people be living?
They were farmers. They were living, working the land. As far as we can tell, when we do excavate Bronze Age field systems, enclosures, there'll be small little fields producing some crops. Wheats and various other things are grown, and oats. And then immediately around you've got this wider landscape. As you look out around Somerset, you can see patches of woodland, but to exploit that wider woodland with wildfowl and other animals from the wider landscape, particularly up towards the Quantocks and getting up for hunting perhaps on the higher areas there.
So they're using these axes to chop down trees for wooden huts, or?
The axes are a bit special. They're very bronze. They're sort of socketed axes. There are some decorated axes, but that introduction of bronze was quite an innovation, as it were, when it comes along in that period. This is in the Middle Bronze Age, but there were special items. If you lost one, you'd either go out and have a proper look for it, or send out all your children to go and make sure that they go and check that field again to find out where on earth they dropped the axe. But the other thing about these axes is they're often then taken together and put into hoards and buried together in various ceremonial ways. But that's a great area of territory for archaeologists to speculate on all sorts of reasons why people put things in hoards.
Could you explain a bit more about these axes? Were they big two-handed axes, or?
They're a one-handed axe. They're often about, let's think in old money, they're about 5 to 6 inches long maximum. They'd be hafted on a handle of maybe 2-foot long wooden ash handle. They could be fixed then and either roped in or fixed in with various forms of fixings from beeswax and other things, but wedged in. They're very functional pieces, and that innovation of moving on from the stone axe to the bronze axe enables them to chop down different trees and work wood differently. So they are quite functional pieces.
Excellent. Is that about the size of an A4 piece of paper, would you say?
What, the
axes?
Yeah, more or less. So, you've got, it's about the same size as your average, not that everybody has an average axe, but your axe for chopping the sticks, for making the fire in the morning, back in the day, or your granny and your granddad's, you would say that's your axe. They were much the same size, 2 foot maximum.
2 foot maximum, excellent. Shall we hop up around the hill?
Yes, let's go and have a look and see if we can find any remnants of these banks and ditches.
So, we've moved on. Oh, sorry, Bob, do you want to say something?
No, we have indeed moved on. We've had a slight detour this time because many people who come up to the centre of the Hillfort, we're at the northwestern corner, which is the furthest away from where you mainly come up the main steps. What we're looking at now is the landscape out on the right-hand side is where the Bronze Age enclosure was. We're on that very edge of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And just if you nip through into the bushes, push your way through, you can see a few big oak trees on part of the boundary, but then running away to the north, we've got a very marked bank. The bank drops down 3 to 4 metres, then there's a ditch, and then it drops even further away as you're looking out towards the Brendan Hills. And this would have clearly been a way to get a great view across to the west. Potentially on this bank where we're standing today, there could well have been a palisade. Palisade is a whole series of timber posts that would have been stuck in and placed in to form a real barrier. So there you've got a ditch that's maybe 3 or 4 metres deep on that side. You can add a palisade of at least 6 feet or say 2 metres plus, so you've got a huge defensive boundary then on this side of the Hillfort, and that could continue all the way around for the several hundreds of metres that that forms the circle of this outer bank and ditch.
And who would they be defending against, the people on this Hillfort?
Well, it's that same old trouble of interpreting defensive places, perhaps areas of conflict, areas of tribal need, or in times of crisis people would come in here. They'd be swapping, they could be trading. One of the interpretations is they sort of think of them as the modern equivalent of the car boot sale, where people would come and exchange goods, and they'd bring and swap, and they could bring stock, they'd bring cattle, horses, as well as actually bringing other things to trade and to buy and sell. So these are important central places.
Is there any evidence that that's what this place was used for?
This one in particular, we've got some evidence of occupation from the Iron Age period, with a few bits of ditches, but only a very few slices have been cut into it, and they've been mainly on the edges of the banks. 1 or 2 little holes in the edge of the Bronze Age there, but as a percentage it's sort of less than 0.something% of the whole area. But we have also looked at crop marks which show other enclosures, so we've got a pretty fair interpretation. But one of the projects for the future is to carry out some geophysical survey, and then on the back of that we're hoping to do, with the permission from Historic England, do a little bit more investigation and actually do some community archaeology up here.
What would that involve?
It will involve several small digs. We'll get openings for local people to join in. If you come up the road from the edge of Norton Fitzwarren, you go right next to the school. We'll get the school involved. So there's real scope for lots of community engagement with archaeology in the future.
I hear there's a story about a dragon that you might be able to inform me more on, Bob.
Once upon a time, are you sitting comfortably? Yes, there are dragon stories. The dragon stories of Norton go back into the medieval period, really. We were trying to chase this up, weren't we? Trying to get back to the very origin of the dragon story. And the early references mix in with folklore, myth and legend. But the earliest depiction of the dragon and Norton can be seen in the parish church, which is just to the south of the Hillfort. You can go in and look at the screen, the carved medieval wooden screen, dates from about 1500, and that depicts the dragon of Norton coming along and eating a few local folk, as dragons did, and that's depicted very clearly in medieval times. But it's linked into the fact there's legends of a battle being here, and the dragon comes out of the blood of the vanquished, and it grows and comes around and feeds on various people in and around Norton. But a great story. Many Hillforts have sort of dragon stories, but Norton in particular is very proud of its dragon story. As you enter Norton Village, on the signpost, it will have the symbol of the dragon.
You talked about a battle just then. Do you have any idea about who the battles between, perhaps?
No, we don't really. I mean, it's folklore, myth and legend, but whether there were battles, people knew these places were defensive places, so they knew it, they called them camps. There were places, they're often called, up on Quantock, you get them Danesborough, so it's all back to the Danes and the Vikings. So there's a lot of oral history about these were places where Vikings came, battle happened, and then out of that story, myths and legends of dragons often grew. And on Quantock itself, there's stories of the great worm of Sherbridge. So there's lots of other little dragon-related stories in Somerset.
You talked briefly about the Vikings. Were they ever in this area?
Vikings came to Watchet. They popped in at Watchet in the 9th century.
How far is Watchet from
Watchet
here?
from here is going to be, I have to still think in miles and not kilometres. It's about 12, 13 miles away to the coast, 14 miles directly to the coast. But Viking archaeological remains in Somerset are very scant. We have very limited amount of real Viking material. There's known references in Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and other things from documentary, but the number of Viking artefacts are fairly few and far between. In the Severn estuary, running up the coast, you've got some really good place names: Steepholm, Flatholm. They're all Viking names. They're all the coastal areas between Bristol, Wales, all the way back around Weston-super-Mare, and even Hinkley Point, right on the corner of Hinkley Point, where the new power station's built. It's not a hill fort, but it's a reference name to a botterstall. It's where the boats could safely go into a small little harbour, and that's a Viking name too. So, but Vikings in Taunton yet to be found.
Shall we continue round the hill fort?
Yep. Walking round the hill fort, you can see in the old previously ploughed soil, you will get little pieces of pottery, occasional flint and other little objects that have been ploughed up after many, many years of ploughing that's gone on this hill fort. It's disturbed some of the archaeological deposits, but recently the site has been acquired by Somerset West and Taunton Council, and in collaboration with the South West Heritage Trust, we're looking at ways in which it can be better managed, and very limited ploughing will take place, and it will be grazed, so the whole site will be transformed over the next few years. This big mound up here, where we're looking now, as we look back towards the view towards Wellington and Norton Village itself, you can see there's a marked ridge on the right hand side of the hill fort, and that is what they think of as the earlier Bronze Age settlement area, and the land particularly to the east drops away, and there's a whole line of oak trees that mark out the boundary bank that form the outer boundary. So those oak trees would have no doubt perhaps been planted as boundary trees at some point, but this central area has, as I said earlier, been ploughed for many, many years, and bits of Roman pottery, prehistoric flints have come up in the surfaces here, giving evidence of occupation right back into the Bronze Age and probably even into the Mesolithic, some of these flints. Now, there's a little entranceway here. Are you feeling brave?
Should we pop in?
If you're brave, we can go in.
You've taken me into a little off the path. Where are we here now, Bob?
Yeah, this is to be done with due care and attention, because we're actually on the north entranceway into the hill fort, and you can see we're standing somewhat precariously in a bramble patch and ivy, about to fall over where the trees have been trimmed back. But below me, at least probably 20 feet down below, is a deep sunken trackway, partly covered with ash and other bushes. There's oak on the side, there's hazel coppice growing up on the back edge, but that is one of the ways in or out, and that's the way up to the north. And as we see where it comes right up to the corner of the hill fort, there would be some sort of control there, no doubt. We don't have the archaeological evidence at the moment in terms of no excavations taken place, but where we've looked at other sites like this, we know there was perhaps some form of gates or control at this top end to be able to get people therefore in the hill fort looking out, and would be able to see very, very clearly of anyone who's arriving down there in that deep and dank part of a gully.
Could you explain to me more about the entrance?
Entrances to hill forts, entrances or exits, whichever way you want to look at them, it's about control. And as we stand on this one, you can see that it is, again, probably 20 metres across at the upper part. And at the base of it, you could imagine a group of people coming in. You imagine a little family arriving, or you could imagine someone driving in a small herd of cattle. And it's wide enough in the base for 4 or 5 metres to get 3 or 4 cows abreast, drive them through, coming up into the hill fort enclosure. This stretches for 400 or 500 metres where we're at now. But at the top end, which is going up the slope, you've come from Norton, which is at the lower part of the slope. You're then heading up back to the top of the hill. Almost certainly there would be some form of gate structure. Think again of a palisade, big timber palisade, and likely to have also some control gates that could have been quite substantial gates, maybe 5 metres in size. Massive post holes where we have looked at sites where they have done work at South Cadbury and other places. You can see some of these big substantial defensive features, but we've got no evidence directly here from Norton, but the answer may well be there. There may well be stratified archaeological remains at the top end, just where this sunken track reaches the inner part of the hill. So we've come in and we've gone round to the left, walk our way round to the left, then you get halfway round, and as you get to that view we can look towards Quantock again. There's a gateway which is a modern intrusion. This is not a prehistoric entrance, this is a modern entrance. The original bank and ditch runs between us, and it's picked up in the line of trees which will be on your left hand side as you walk along this area.
I can see a very prominent dip in the hill. Do we know why this is here? It's not as flat as the rest of the hill.
No, well this is a geological feature. It's not archaeological. It's part of the natural slope of the hill. Maybe something linked in with a springing point in a wet area. There's quite a wet pond further down, but it's geological and not archaeological. But it's surprising that they did actually still include that within the enclosure that made up the hill fort.
Is the hill entirely natural then?
Well, you've got a natural hill itself. It's on Triassic stone, which outcrops here, so there's a little promontory. And then people in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age, they actually shaped the edges of that and put in the bank and ditch to redefine a boundary around the very top of this hilltop. It is an actual hilltop. It's not a hill slope where there are enclosures like Truscombe and other places on Quantock. This is really actually on top of a hill itself. And as we look back from this point, you can see quite clearly the hill is rising away from us. So up on the top there's the actual summit of the hill. Gentle, but it is its own freestanding hill, because if you remember when we were on the other side, it drops away towards Norton Camp, it drops away towards the Quantocks, it drops away behind us into the vale. So we've got this little natural hillock that has then been had the ditch and the bank to form the big defensive enclosure that we're in today. Then eventually up here we can break to the left and cut into the overgrown area. Right, so 3/4 of the way round now. We're going off through a break in the hedge and the bank. As we step through, we're moving over the bank. The bank is massive. It's probably 4 or 5 metres wide here. It's got oak trees growing on the top of it. Here it's been denuded by visitors over many years, but you can see quite clearly the bank is a good couple of metres higher than we are at the moment. So let's carefully go down here without falling over and carry on. Through the bushes. There's the bank. You can see that bank now. It's very, very clear. But our plan is to gradually clear some of this hazel and this overgrown timbers. We'll leave the oak trees, and in the fullness of time they will be ready to be felled at some point, but the thing we don't want them to do is to fall over, because if they do fall over they take away a huge bowl of soil and archaeology as they fall away. But we want to expose this bank, open it up and get more grass growing. Then that helps the biodiversity, because we'll then get the right butterflies and things that will come in. We'll get a more grassland effect rather than just this overgrown woodland. Anyway, we're going to go through the bushes, follow the oak trees and see if we can find the other entrance. In the middle of the woods, on this side, there's an area of maybe 30 to 40 metres of woodland. The plan is to gradually clear some of this and use this area for forest schools, for eco-adventures for the local school to come in. This becomes an actual sort of wooded area for future activity to do nature conservation. But if we look ahead through the bushes, at the far end you can see that bank. The bank again is rising up maybe 3 or 4 metres ahead of us, and that forms the boundary to the main Hillfort. So we're actually outside the Hillfort where we are now. We're heading down to see if we can find one of the entrances, which is slightly further around this. These oak trees, by the way, many of these oak trees are probably 80 to 100 years old, and quite when they were planted, we haven't done the later historical documentary work, but they're really quite good for nature conservation. We can hear the rooks and that above us, lots of birds around here, and unlocking this place gently and opening up and letting more light in is part of the plan. Somebody's already had a go at some point here and excavated a little ditch, so somebody's done some diggings here, but that's to our advantage. It's outside the Hillfort, we're on the edge of this piece of land, and we'll probably use this in the future as an area for children and young people to enjoy having a camp in the woods. So there's a whole host of activities that can come on as we reuse the landscape, not just for archaeology but nature conservation and environmental studies.
So where have we got to now, Bob?
Yes, there's a little rambling through the bushes, a lot of rambling, and a lot of brambles about, but it's really great to come at this time of the year in the autumn. It's great to come at any time, in fact, but if you come in the spring you can see through and see a little bit more clearly. Here you can see very much an overgrown landscape, but as we get round to the last big deep cut, we see a modern intrusion in the form of a little bridge, very much like a trit-trot troll bridge here. We're going to go across that bridge, and that bridge straddles the original entrance, which is on this southern side. This is deeper even than the northern one. It's quite wide, it's probably nearly 20 metres wide, and in places up to 5, 6 or more metres deep. But this would have been a trackway, a drove way, we think, coming up from the Vale, and it's probably one of the main ways in, probably the main way in. There's a similar one over to the west, but clearly people were coming in from at least 2, if not 3 directions to get to the Hillfort. So that in itself is quite an unusual thing. So lots of speculation about how they could have used, but sandyish soil in places and stock moving up and down would cause erosion. So they've dug part of it away, but then lots of people and animals being driven in and out would actually exacerbate that and giving you this deep sunken cutting which forms the way up into the way in. So we're going to go trot over the bridge, but a bit slippy today, so careful on the steps and work your way down. We're now in the middle of the main entranceway. We're standing 10 feet above where the original surface was, and indeed in the winter at the bottom there is a very wet puddle, and that leads right the way through back to the new houses which have been built on the edge and the outer part of the other part of the Hillfort there. And this area is used as a bit of an adventure playground. There's quite a bit of bits and pieces thrown in, But again, part of the plan over the next few years is to consolidate the site, make people a lot more aware of it, have a little play area, but encourage people also to take their rubbish home rather than leave it as we see today.
So people coming up to the Hillfort?
Yeah, visitors welcome. We've got to organise some new steps and an approach road, a little ramp really, so that we can get all ability access. That's going to happen sometime in the next year or so, providing we can get some additional funding. We'll be looking to get a bid into the National Lottery Heritage Fund to see if we can get some support for that. But this is one of those sort of forgotten sites of Somerset, really. People know it, but actually to come and see it, you think, well, I got there's just a field. Our plan is to say, well, there's a field, but there's an awful lot more, and let's see if we can unlock that for people.
And thanks for the brilliant tour of the Hillfort. I've learned a huge amount about it. Any final words about the place?
I think really it's very much about, it's a place to discover. It requires a little bit of searching out, but once you get here and do the pilgrimage, go and look through into the bushes, follow the trail back through the woodland, you can then get an idea of perhaps of going back in time a wee bit, as we've done here, and see the very nature of the massive earthworks and things that have gone on that go back for at least 2,000, almost 3,000 years.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the South West Heritage Trust podcast. We hope you tune in again soon.
And here comes the rain again. There's a song there.